Ladies, gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to this oneliner.com podcast. I am Scott Morris. I will be joined in a moment by Drew Tamdale as we continue our dive into films What We Done Saw since January, the third part of our epic catch-up podcast. We'll have something fresher for you coming up very soon, but until then, just sit back, relax, and let us take you through some of the films we enjoyed most over the past year. Edge of Tomorrow, another huge big budget sci-fi film based on a manga, I believe, one of those Japanese animes, by the baffling title of Hiroshi Sakuzara's All You Need Is Kill. A grandiose name for something. Anyway, in this film we see humans locked in a battle for survival against an alien enemy. It doesn't look like things are going too well. We've started to develop a bunch of mechanised combat suits which look quite cool, and there's hopes that these will start to turn the tide of battle. However, privately, most military minds think that it's probably not going to go so well. Tom Cruise plays a officer who is more of a slick PR man who's more concerned with getting people to sign up for the meat grinder than actually going to war himself, but that comes to a change when he's basically dispatched to Brendan Gleeson's General Brigham's forces to go in there for one massive push into the alien's nest. This doesn't go so well for him, for the somewhat cowardly character Cruise is playing at the start, as basically he dies fairly quickly. However, something interesting happens. He wakes up again. As part of the film's one particularly ludicrous method of getting us into this kind of time loop scenario, he has been blessed/cursed with the ability to keep reliving this day. A bit like Groundhog Day, but with weapons and aliens and shit. So he's trying to understand what's happening to him as he keeps repeating the same day over and over again. As the same things keep happening, he keeps dying, he keeps coming back, and he eventually tries to tie this back into something that happened to Emily Blunt's character, Rita, who's hailed as the angel of something or other. She would
the North.
The North.
That's a statue.
That's correct. That's just a big guy with huge wings. That doesn't help. Eventually, when they meet up, it seems that what had happened to Tom Cruise happened to Emily Blunt's character. She was caught in such a similar time loop, and of course the reason she was able to kill so many people was that she'd had a lot of practice at it by that point. So she takes it upon herself to team up with Tom Cruise, train him up a little bit, and try and basically end the war on their terms by striking at the heart of the alien menace. It works quite well. Said in these kind of things before that sci-fi films tend to have one big thing that you've got to swallow. In this case, it's the fairly ridiculous nature of the time travel and aliens, and when that is explained, it's almost with a really big wink to the camera while they're doing so, because it is astonishingly stupid. I mean, the central premise for it is just very, very silly indeed, and that is perhaps something you're just going to have to forgive the film for. Everything around it, though, is handled really, really well. It's a great performance from Tom Cruise, who's not normally one for portraying weasels, but he does it very well in this film, and it becomes a kind of believable progression as he goes from this total wuss into a battle-hardened warrior by the end of the film. Basically, everything that it's trying to do, it does very well. It's a solid cast. The effects works really good. Action's handled very well. Aliens look okay as far as these things go. Certainly no worse than any other creature feature type film that you've seen. There's lots of really nice touches. The way it deals with this time loop is far more interesting than, say, Looper did. Not quite so cerebral content, but it does, I think, work far more consistently and far more entertainingly. I really liked Edge of Tomorrow. Certainly one of the better action-orientated films I've seen this year, and one that I think everyone should go and take a look at if you can possibly spare the time.
I'm slightly annoyed that I missed it in the cinema. I intend to catch up with it soon because it looks rather entertaining. And also Emily Blunt.
Yes.
I know our absent member tonight will agree wholeheartedly.
We can all agree, Emily Blunt.
Yes. Yep, that doesn't make us sound lecherous at all. How to Train Your Dragon 2, the cunningly named sequel to How to Train Your Dragon. How do they come up with these names? Anyway, this picks up a few years after the end of How to Train Your Dragon. Hiccup, our star, is a little older now, but he's still riding his dragon Toothless, and his home of Berk is now home to dragons where they live happily alongside the humans. It all seems pretty good, really. But while undertaking his pet project of riding Toothless out to the reaches of the known world and trying to map everything, he stumbles upon some other dragon hunters who, it turns out, are looking for dragons for someone's massive dragon army. The one thing this film doesn't have for it is really good naming of stuff. How to Train Your Dragon 2 and a Dragon Army, which is an army of dragons. After escaping from these dragon hunters, Hiccup runs into some more dragons. Lots of dragons. Lots and lots and lots of dragons. Dragons. Yes. Dragons.
So would you say this is a film about dragons?
Now, I don't want to pigeonhole it, but it's quite dragon heavy, yes. Now, since me and I think most of the world actually find dragons pretty cool, it's quite a good thing. In amongst these new dragons that he's found, though, he finds something particularly unexpected, and the one bit of the film that never really seemed necessary, he runs into his mother, who, if you remember from the first film, had died when he was young. And this is the one bit where it feels like, yeah, they're backfilling a bit here. But it's a minor complaint, so I'll just mention it and pass on. Hiccup then reunites his mother with his father, and everything looks like it's going quite well, until the dragon army comes back into their midst, and the evil warlord Drago, again, not so much with the original naming in this, but the evil warlord Drago comes to attack them because he wants their dragons for his dragon army, and they fight him, and there. That's largely the premise of the film. I think all of us at theOneliner were very, very fond of the original How to Train Your Dragon, and when I heard that they were making a sequel, particularly given how neatly the first film ended, I was a bit annoyed. It didn't feel to me like it needed a sequel, and you know what? It didn't need a sequel. But since the sequel has to be really, really, really good anyway, I'll take it. It is a massively unnecessary sequel, but since it's really successful in managing to capture or recapture pretty much all of the charm that made the first one so entertaining, it's a massive success. I don't think I have a bad word to say about it, apart from the couple of niggly things I mentioned there, other than Cate Blanchett's accent, which is even worse than her accent in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Don't believe you.
Trust me. I know it's a hard one to swallow, given how terrible that was. Possible? But yes, we're talking Charlotte Copley and Maleficent levels of bad accent here. So that minor thing aside, though, it's really funny, it's heartwarming, it's touching, there's great voice performances from almost everybody. It manages to recapture almost all the charm of the first one, so if you like the first one, watch this, you'll love it. If you didn't like the first one, if you just want to stop breathing for 5 or 6 minutes, that'd be grand. Because I'm afraid we just can't do business.
So we move on to the Grand Budapest Hotel, another Wes Anderson joint. Now, I would say at the moment that Grand Budapest Hotel is a very strong contender for my favourite film of the year. Unfortunately, it is a film that I saw like 6 months ago, so I'm struggling to recall a lot of the detail on it, so you'll just have to take my word for it that it is brilliant. It's based around the titular Budapest Hotel, and particularly the concierge, Gustav H., played by Ralph Fiennes, and his relationship with a young bellboy who becomes his most trusted friend and lieutenant in the various somewhat bizarre goings-on in the hotel. Now,
in the war against the luggage.
Yes. It has pretty much all the usual suspects you'd expect Wes Anderson to have in his movies, and they all play really interesting, quirky characters. Now, I think the only criticism that you could possibly validly level at the Grand Budapest Hotel is that it's very Wes Anderson. It's almost like Wes Anderson by numbers, in the same way you could say that about Moonrise Kingdom or almost any of the films. It is whimsy overload. You can tell the kind of general gist of how it's going to go from the previous stuff. Now, if you're going to call Wes Anderson stuff formulaic, there's a possible case to be made there. But I think the thing you have to remember about Wes Anderson is he's been really carefully examining that formula and making it the best he possibly can with every iteration of the films that he produces, and I think this is possibly peak Anderson. I think he's got it just absolutely spot on here. It's brilliant. The character that Fiennes is playing is just absolutely brilliant. It's tremendously funny all the way through. It's entertaining. It's a complete riot of a romp through the history and time. It's just overwhelmingly nice, and which is another one of these things you don't like to talk about films, like nice and quirky. It all sounds like insults, but this is just it done so well. I can't give you much more of a comprehensive reason. Unfortunately, the details have kind of been blurred in my memory, but it is a great film. Lots of really great characters, all of which are very enjoyable to watch, all of which are very well realised. It's obviously not even remotely realistic. It is daft.
Oh, no. Back up. A Wes Anderson film's not very realistic.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
My illusions are shattered.
It is not adhering to dogma standards. But regardless of that, it's just really great. It is not doing anything, to be fair, that you've not seen, or at least similar in tone, that you've not seen from Wes Anderson's previous work, but I think this is just doing it far better than anything else. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the best looking films you'll see. Brilliant use of colour, so vibrant looking, and the reflection of that and the vibrancy that the characters have, it just all works very well. Usual brilliant soundtrack from Anderson stuff as well. I can't have a bad word against it. Yes, highly, highly enjoyable. If you've got even the slightest inclination towards the sort of filmmaking that Wes Anderson has been putting out, you really got to see this. I think it is his best work. I can always hope, but I don't think he'll do anything better than this. This seems to be the ideal distillation of the sort of thing that he does. So yes, highly recommended. Definitely go and see it on your either streaming service or DVD/Blu-ray of choice as soon as you are able to do so.
Duly noted. We've mentioned on previous podcasts quite a while ago now, I think it was around about Spider-Man 2 we first mentioned this, that we were getting a bit fed up of comic book movies. And thinking back, that's possibly not fair. It feels like we're being overwhelmed by them. But if you think maybe 3 a year, given the huge number of films released, it's not that many.
Yeah.
This year, it feels like there were more, because there were 4 notable ones. Even that said, and having revisited my position on how overwhelmed I feel by them, I have to say, another Captain America film wasn't doing it for me. The original Captain America is, quite frankly, really dull. Kind of dull origin story. Certainly very, very dull action set pieces and the most boring of villains. You know, your typical would to take over the world. Which is always really, really boring.
Yeah.
So, having been thoroughly unimpressed with the original Captain America, the sequel, I thought I should probably see for completeness, but didn't hold out much hope for it. Much to my amazement, it turns out to be probably the best Marvel film there's been yet. I absolutely love this. Steve Rogers finds himself in the modern times, and after the events of the Avengers, has some colleagues, but is still very much struggling to fit into the world. He doesn't really know what to do and what to make of himself. When he's faced with a Soviet-era super soldier much like himself, though, he realises that he can do what he was meant to do, which is save the world. During this crisis of fighting the super soldier, though, he finds himself betrayed and S.H.I.E.L.D. damaged from within. He's then framed for a murder. Is he framed for a murder? Is that right?
Yes.
He's framed for something, isn't he?
Yes, that's correct. I suspected, framed for a murder that didn't actually happen in the end, but yes.
Yes.
Framed for a crime that he not only did not commit, that was not committed.
Yes. I will go for the 18th thing, and I was framed for a crime he did not commit. Framed for a crime he did not commit, he escapes to the Los Angeles Underground, where you can find him. No, it's Washington. Sorry, yes, Washington Underground. He goes on a run to clear his name and find out just what has happened, and is joined on this adventure by Scarlett Johansson as the Black Widow. As for the rest of the plot, I won't bother mentioning that, just I'll let you enjoy that for yourselves. So I need to talk about the stuff that really works here. First of all, basically everybody in here is just a much more interesting character. For the first time, Nick Fury actually gets to be somebody other than the guy who gives the orders. Chris Evans as Steve Rogers gets to flex himself a bit, he gets to be interesting. Black Widow, actually a character this time, and the conversations between her and Steve Rogers have really good chemistry and just feel relaxed and real in a way that even the best bits in the Avengers didn't.
Yeah.
Anthony Mackie's a very welcome addition as Falcon, and why it works quite so well, I'm not sure I can put into words. Part of it is the stakes. There's no terrible villain saying, I want to take over the world, as Guardians of the Galaxy did, which is generally a rather boring villain. The villain in this isn't really a single figurehead. It's much more pernicious than that, and it's much more interesting. The stakes are also lower, in that rather than it's a take over the whole world thing, it's a take over an organisation thing and perhaps kill some civilians, but because it's so much more manageable in scale, it's much easier to get invested in. It's the scale, I think that's the really what to say, is the scale is believable because somebody wants to take over the world and the whole world's in peril, it's hard to care, it's just too big. You put something on a more manageable human scale, you can get much more invested in it. If you'd seen this, you'd understand exactly what I meant, but you also wouldn't need to hear me tell you about it, so that's not really helpful.
What I liked about Captain America is that you might as well have subtitled it as Captain America, the character development, because it really does flesh out a lot of his character, and really not just his character, but by reflection, America itself. himself, because obviously he's seen as the fighting for the reflection of American ideals, isn't it? But from what you can see with what's happening to S.H.I.E.L.D., as it turns out, because they're being undermined from within, you can see that maybe America's not the sort of idea he wants to fight for, and how that's changed since his heyday. And that's a really interesting arc, especially if they do what they're currently planning to do with the proposed Iron Man 4 idea, which is kind of rehashing the Civil War plotline, which would be very strange if they do decide to do that, because it's not one of the most universally well-received Marvel arcs anyway. So it's got a really good arc for Steve Rogers himself. I think it does a lot of good character development there, a lot of good work, and it also makes the Marvel universe, at least in terms of the kind of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing, a much more interesting place by the time it's left, because events are developing for S.H.I.E.L.D., I think it's fair to say, and it's gone from a much more interesting position by the end of it to see what they're going to do for the next Avengers film. It's got a lot of potential to have some really interesting movies in that, and I hope they don't just reset itself between films to being, an all-seeing, all-well-funded organisation. There's a chance to do something quite interesting with the kind of support and the whole background of the Marvel Universe, if that's the way they're going to do it. Very well done. I'm not so sold on Falcon, is probably my only niggle. I like the character, but I just don't like this silly flying equipment thing. It didn't really do much for me.
That wasn't great. I just have a lot of time for Anthony Mackie, and I really thought he was a good character to add.
Yeah.
It's because he's a very good actor. The flying bit, perhaps not so much, but that's fairly minor.
And yeah, it's an interesting little bit of interplay between him and the Winter Soldier as well. Maybe not going into it too much. I'm sure it's not much of a spoiler, I guess, but we'll leave that aside. But even though that is the subtitle of the film, it's perhaps the least interesting thing that's going on in there. I mean, he's just another sort of axis from which to move Steve Rogers' character around and give him a bit more of a bulked out character, rather than just being a one note, we are rah-rah, America's brilliant kind of character, which is obviously exactly what you want when you're fighting Nazis. But in this day and age, it needs to be a bit more complicated, and this is a bit more of a more complicated, and even I tried to say it for something that is at heart a fairly silly comic book thing, but it's a bit more mature.
I think a lot of the Marvel films, and particularly the first Captain America too, it was very much a black and white goodies versus baddies thing.
Yeah.
And this is much more subtle. There are more grey areas. You don't necessarily know who the enemy is, and as you were saying with the modern America, the good guy isn't necessarily so good or so obvious either.
Yeah, I think I'm spent with that, other than just to say, if I've not done already, that yes, it is very good. Possibly the best Marvel film, certainly outside of the Iron Man franchise. Well worth looking at.
The other thing that it does, you said largely, Scott, too, it's the character thing, because more of the people in this feel like characters.
Yeah.
Because Nick Fury's not just Shouty Man anymore. And it's not often that Samuel L. Jackson has to do anything other than be Shouty Man. And here he's given something a bit more, that isn't Mace Windu, so isn't lumbered with the world's worst dialogue or anything. And Black Widow, in this case, when she's talking to Steve Rogers, when they're just doing something as simple as driving somewhere, it's very relaxed, it's good chemistry, and she feels like a person as opposed to the voluptuous woman in the black catsuit. She feels like a person as opposed to a clothes horse. Not 100% how she was portrayed in the Avengers, but it came close to it.
Yeah.
And certainly was how she was in Iron Man 2. Yes, but yeah, very, very good indeed. And has probably just reignited my interest in the interconnected Marvel films, because it was beginning to wane somewhat.
Yeah. Moving on to Inside Llewyn Davis. I always want to say Llewellyn for some reason, but it's Llewyn. Llewyn Davis.
For ages before, I thought it was Llewyn Davis, and I watched the film. Oh right, when I saw it, it wasn't a spelling mistake. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So I dare say I will say this many times, so apologies. You know what I mean over the course of it. It's Inside Llewyn Davis, the film from Ethan and Joel Coen, written by Joel and Ethan Coen. Llewyn Davis is a fictional folk character. There seems to be various theories about who it's based on loosely, but let's not get into that. Played by Oscar Isaac, he's a struggling folk singer in the early 60s, slumming around New York trying to get gigs and variously leech off friends and basically try and scrape by, despite the fact he's not really being too successful in his chosen field. He was doing much better in a previous duo, but unfortunately his partner decided to kill himself, and he's struggling to establish himself as a solo artist on the folk scene. And basically that is the extent of inside Llewyn Davis. We're just following Llewyn Davis around for a week or so as he tries to make basically one last-ditch attempt to try and get something moving, to kickstart his career and actually start making some money and keep on the good side of his friends and other relationships that he has. As the course of this, he meets various interesting characters such as other jazz musicians and record executives and so on and so forth. Other folk singers, including Justin Timberlake. And basically it's something of a road movie is probably the closest I can come to saying of it.
That's not inaccurate.
Yeah, you're basically just following this guy around as he tries to make one last go at the kind of career he wants before going back to the family business, I believe it was, wasn't it? It works very well. It captures a lot of kind of interesting period detail and the start of the transition from the folk scene over to something a bit more rock orientated. That sort of transition of the musical phases. Really quite an interesting film to watch. It probably doesn't have a point as such. You can come out of this going, well, that was very enjoyable, and I enjoyed most of the music in it, which is a rarity for me given that it's folk music. But you did get to the end of it and kind of not really learn anything in particular about anything in particular. But that's not entirely uncommon with the Coen brothers' work.
Yeah, I'm particularly thinking of A Serious Man there.
Yes, and even a great many films of theirs that I've enjoyed more, like Big Lebowski's not really teaching you anything about anything, but it's fucking fantastic.
Yes.
And for the most part, so is Inside Llewyn Davis. A lot of good performances, a lot of great turns in there, assured direction, the usual kind of really high standards of visuals and whatnot and framing and all that good stuff that you'd expect from the Coen brothers, nice pacing. Doesn't get boring despite the fact that it's, fairly slow-paced film. Lots of nice little character moments, funny in places, everything you'd want from a Coen brothers film really. Highly recommended. Maybe not their absolute best work, but it's certainly up there. Yeah, highly recommend it. Give it a bash.
Yeah, I can absolutely see why people wouldn't like this film. Definitely not something that's for everybody, but this just hits so many right notes for me. It's very meandering.
Yes.
And again, it doesn't have much of a plot. It doesn't have much of a point. Yet I just found it utterly captivating.
Yeah.
Helped a lot by Oscar Isaac in the title role. He's fantastic. Look forward to seeing a lot more of him in the future. Good support from Kerry Mulligan, Coen Brothers staple John Goodman. And it's just an interesting, slightly pathetic, slightly ridiculous character that you still can't help feeling engaged in.
Yeah.
And it's really, really, really good. Aye, you should watch it. There we go. Look at that. Why don't I get a Pulitzer for that? It's really good, watch it. Robbed, I tell you. The last of the comic book films we're going to cover, and one of the more successful ones, X-Men Days of Future Past. Slightly different from the book it's based on in terms of who the main character is, although it's not going to surprise anyone that they chose Wolverine, or indeed why they chose Wolverine, given he's the most well-known and probably most interesting character, certainly in terms of the X-Men on the big screen. It's dark days for the X-Men. The government has developed giant sentinel robots which are going around hunting down and killing all mutants, and their days are numbered. They're all going to die. But they find out there is one person most wholly responsible for these robots, and it's Miles Bennett Dyson. No, wait, that's not right. Peter Dinklage, that's it. Yes, one person entirely responsible for these giant killing machines that are slaughtering them in the future, and that's Peter Dinklage, who gets his hands on a mutant in the 1970s and bases lots of his future research on that eventually leads to the demise of the mutants. So in a last-ditch attempt to ensure their existence, they send one of their own number back in time to take him out. This man's name is Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's not right either, is it? No. So the start of this may seem very like another film you may have watched, but they decide that the only person whose mind and body could take the process of travelling back in time to his younger self is Wolverine. So he goes back into the 1970s to seek out his younger self and the younger Professor... he goes back in time as his younger self to seek out the young Professor Xavier and your fella...
Magneto,
God, thank you, yes. He goes back in time as his younger self to seek out the 1970s Magneto and Professor X to get them to put their differences aside and work together to stop Peter Dinklage from killing them all.
Oh, that Peter Dinklage.
Yes, curse you, Dinklebot. Do we need much more plot? He goes back into the past and he finds them, and they work together against Peter Dinklage, as you'd expect it to go. It's not without hiccups. After the events of X-Men First Class, Magneto and Charles Xavier, they're not getting on famously, as one might imagine.
So the central conceit, I guess, of X-Men Days of Future Past is that you've got the younger and older versions of guys like Magneto and Xavier playing with each other's minds, effectively. It's an interesting way to bridge the two franchises, which kind of felt like they were sort of separate versions of each other, and this is a good way to kind of join them up.
Mm-hmm. Without looking too much like they're just backfilling desperately.
Yes. Basically, I like this because I like the cast of all the X-Men films for the most part. There's not really made too many mistakes in their casting. I particularly like James McAvoy as the young Charles. I think he does very well. I like Michael Fassbender's young Magneto. Obviously, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are great. Hugh Jackman's iconic in these roles. The supporting acts tend to be pretty good as well. This is, as a film, I enjoyed it wholeheartedly because I like that cast so much.
They're very, very watchable.
Yeah, and because most of them have had these roles, a lot of them had them for a good long while. The kind of character interplays works very well. Lots of nice little character moments, and so on and so forth. As a film, the story isn't really brilliant, I don't think. It seems a lot like it's kind of an excuse to do this sort of thing, rather than it makes a lot of coherent sense. I don't think its timeline is quite correct for what's going, but I don't really care, because it was basically an excuse to get lots of cool action set pieces, and for the most part it delivers that. I would have probably liked to see a bit more of the fighting of Sentinels, to be honest with you. Perhaps in something that was a bit more kind of down and dirty way of doing it. There's like one decent fight with Wolverine and a Sentinel that worked quite well, and the rest of them are a bit underwhelming, especially with the kind of future mutants of the guys like Bishop and the other kind of characters who are very slightly introduced. They're not fleshed out too well. There's certainly more weaknesses you could sit and pick at it, I think, compared to certainly First Class, certainly X-Men 2. But you know what, I don't really care so much because it's really enjoyable. So that's probably what I'm more looking for in X-Men films than anything else, is at heart entertainment rather than...
Entertainment, good performances, big set pieces. Yeah,
delivers on those for the most part. So yeah, it's one of the more successful comic book tentpole type things this summer.
Yep, a couple of scenes too where people get to kind of stretch their acting chops a bit. Some of the scenes with Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart in particular. A couple of points that bothered me slightly. Again, probably nitpicking, but there's one in particular mentions that doesn't seem to fit in with the rest of the films, is that 1970s Magneto seems to be basically God.
Yeah.
I think they've gone a bit far with his powers, particularly when he lifts an entire football stadium, a baseball stadium. It's gone a bit far.
That's one of the things that I thought, that's silly, but it's also kind of awesome, so I'll let it slide.
I suppose it fits in with moving the Golden Gate Bridge in X-Men 3, which fortunately this basically eradicates. Way! There's another upside to X-Men Days of Future Past. Sometimes it just seems a bit over the top. Like if he was that powerful, nobody could stop him.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the Superman problems. That's fairly minor. Let's just make for a good set piece. Everybody is on really good form. It's yet another comic book movie. This year, as I said earlier, it feels like there have been a lot. There's 4. It's not really that many if you think about it. This is definitely one of the most successful, very entertaining. There we go. Yes, watch it.
August, Osage County. Sorry, it's not a country, it's just a county. August, Osage County is a drama. We're looking at a family in the Oklahoma districts, I believe. Basically, it is about a family that reunites under less than ideal conditions. And as with most of these things, when you have a family under one roof that hasn't been together for a long time and went their own separate ways for understandable reasons, tensions start to flare. There's lots of interactions that are tense and full of charged conflict. There's a lot of very interesting characters here. I don't have a lot more to say about it than that. In terms of plot, it's a family drama with lots of nice family ties. Drew can probably do a better job of filling in bits of this than I do. It's surprisingly enjoyable given its cast.
Yes, this was going to be one of my main points, yes.
Yeah, and it all works very well. There's lots of really believable and good interactions between the cast. That really elevates it to something a bit better than normal. It's hardly laughing-minute stuff, but it has enough moments of levity and enough really interesting, kind of funny character moments to keep things rolling through. Some of the characters are very sympathetic and some of the characters are not, and there's a nice sort of spectrum of things in between. It feels like a believable family with actually believable, strong female characters, which is always nice to see in a film, given that they're normally in a cat suit. And,
yes.
So I rather enjoyed it. Drew, what do you make of it?
Yes, the believable family dynamic, I think, can't really be overstated in a film like this.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of two things. Of one example that got it really, really right and one that got it very wrong. We've talked about it in previous podcasts, but many years ago. The first was The Family Stone.
Yeah.
Which utterly failed and was not a believable family at all, which means you suddenly don't care about the characters and the whole film falls apart. Move on to something like Dan in Real Life. For all that some of the stuff that happens is farcical, there's a wonderful chemistry between the cast. You believe that there's a family.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference. And in this case, while in Dan in Real Life it was a loving family, in this case very much a bickering, begrudgingly together family, it's still really, really believable. Without that, the film falls apart. With it, it's massively compelling. What makes that particularly remarkable is that this film doesn't just star Julia Roberts. It doesn't just star Meryl Streep. It stars Meryl Streep and Julia Roberts, and they're fantastic. And I never thought I would say such a thing about either one of them, let alone both of them, let alone both in the same film. Now, perhaps it helps that Meryl Streep, who I'm sure any regular listeners will know we've never cared much for, me particularly, and always thought was massively overrated. Perhaps it helps that her character in this is so unlikable, but she's great. For once, I would see what the hype was about with Meryl Streep. The family bicker a lot, but again, it feels believable. Even Ewan McGregor, although lumbered with a terrible accent in this and it's a smaller role, even Ewan McGregor seems to acquit himself pretty well in this. Mm-hmm. And as you said, Scott, it's the fact that it's strong female characters. They're so rare. In this, they're great. They're central. The men are peripheral characters. And it just makes such a pleasant change. In terms of what happens, there's no great shakes in terms of what's going on in the place. Well, up until something I'll come to later. It's just a really good drama, extremely well written, excellent performances from the cast. That would be enough. You wouldn't need any more. It's great. Unfortunately, there are two issues I have with the film. Well, actually it's four, really, but three of them are the same issue in slightly different form. So let me get these out of the way. Firstly, Dermot Mulroney is miscast, or at least his character's out of place. He plays the love interest of one of the daughters. He's a bit of a jackass, a bit of a sort of smarmy, let's use car salesman type. He just doesn't fit. Whether that's maybe the one place where the character's not well written or it's casting, I'm not sure. He seems out of place. That's fairly minor. He's far more thinly drawn than any of the other characters, and the main thing, apart from accepting one of the other issues I'm going to talk about, he's given nothing of importance to contribute. So for the most part, he feels extraneous. Now, the other issue, or issues I have, are that the film's really getting along quite nicely, with plenty of compelling relationships and drama, when not one but three drama bombs are dropped in. And the big problem is the film doesn't need any of them. It could support probably one, but not all three. And the film's lesser for it. It's almost as if the writer got scared that the audience would lose interest. An unfounded fear, I feel, because I say the relationships are so real and compelling. You almost feel like you're a spy on the wall in somebody's real house during a time of crisis, and then just sort of keep adding in things to shake things up that it never needed. I'm aware that sounds ridiculously vague, but that's so I don't give away anything that happens. Mm-hmm. But even with those, it's still an excellent film, superb ensemble, cast performance, and the weirdest thing, you'll ever hear from me say, this is a film with Meryl Streep and Julia Roberts and you should really, 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 really watch it. I'm sorry. Right, so finally we come to The Wolf of Wall Street, latest film from legendary filmmaker Martin Scorsese. This stars once again his new muse, Leonardo DiCaprio, as Jordan Belfort, the titular Wolf of Wall Street, who was a small-time dealer in Wall Street during the early 1980s and lost his job when the stock market crashed. He then started a small business, basically selling shitty stocks to people who didn't know any better, and made a fortune. He then got a bigger office on Wall Street and went about being basically the most debauched person you can imagine being and having a whale of a time doing it. It chronicles the legendary excesses of him and other people on Wall Street. Drugs and hookers and cars and helicopters and drugs and drink and drugs. And there's quite a lot of drugs. And there's a scene with the drugs, and there's a bit where they take the drugs, and then there's a bit in the helicopter when he's on drugs, and there's a bit in the car with the drugs, and then there's the drugs, and there's a drug dealing in the drugs. So it's quite a varied film, really, in what happens. Jordan Belfort is very much an anti-hero here. He's debauched, he's criminal, he's uncaring, he's a terrible father, terrible husband, terrible person, except he's deeply, deeply compelling. And you'll probably feel very, very bad for enjoying this film. There's so much stuff in it that you're laughing at or enjoying that you feel you shouldn't and you feel very dirty for, but you're still laughing while you're thinking that. It's a 3-hour film that flies and doesn't feel anything close to that, and has basically an entire cast on top form, directed by one of the greatest directors in Western cinema. It's a success in almost every way. Superb performance by Leonardo DiCaprio in the main role, excellent support from Jonah Hill, Margot Robbie, a great cameo, bizarre as it is, from Matthew McConaughey, though Matthew McConaughey, who remembered 5 years ago acting. I'll give that a go. Rob Reiner as his dad. It's kind of like, I don't want to be too reductive here, but if you think of it like Goodfellas on Wall Street, it has that sort of feel to it, although much funnier than Goodfellas is. It's just a film of the most ludicrous excess that bizarrely based largely on something that actually happened. It rips along at an incredible pace, never seems to let up, is consistently funny, and one of the best films I've seen this year.
Yeah, it's disgustingly wonderful, isn't it?
It's a good way to put it, yes.
You shouldn't by rights just immediately loathe and despise all these characters, but somehow the sheer audacity of everything that's going on, you just can't help but have a respect for them. It's just such a vibrant film, and even though it is fueled by all this drugs and excess, somehow it just kind of works in this character who eventually gets his comeuppance of a sort. Although I suppose the whole plot of it is his rise and eventual fall by the feds, Kyle Chandler's federal agent who's on the course to try and take him down. Eventually he gets his way, but that's never really the most exciting thing. It's just the character study of this absolutely bafflingly ludicrous character that is, by all accounts, accurate rather than a grotesque parody, which what would seem to be a satire on the excesses of everything that Wall Street's done. But no, it's just a simple documentary.
Audacity is the word, I think, Scott. To get these characters to be believable and entertaining, well, not believable, so entertaining and that you can engage with, you just have to go really, really, really big.
Yeah.
So go enormous or go home. They're so over the top. You feel so dirty for laughing at it, and they're the most repugnant people. Yeah. And I was howling with laughter through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's amazingly well told. I guess a tribute to DiCaprio's charisma that he can pull this off. This whole thing could very easily have fallen flat and just been a bit of a wreck, but he's pulled it off very well, and it's a tremendously enjoyable film and just a ridiculous bit of excess, but nonetheless one that works very well. One of the rare instances of a 3-hour film that really doesn't feel like a 3-hour film.
Not even
absolutely
close.
zips around. One of the most enjoyable films I think you could watch this year, and certainly something that you should do. I will countenance no dissenting opinion on this.
We're at the end of that rather exhausting list of films we've seen this year and hadn't yet been able to talk to you about. We will be back soon, but we hope you've enjoyed what we had to say today. If you have any thoughts or comments, please contact us at podcast@theoneliner.com, or you can find us on Twitter @theoneliner. But until next time, I have been Drew, and Scott has been Scott.
I have indeed. Goodbye.
That'll do.
Maybe tomorrow I'll look to settle down. Until tomorrow, we'll just keep repeating a time loop.
You're thinking of becoming a small runaway dog?
Aren't we all? I mean, seriously, who isn't?